Hi everyone. So today I am going to talk about this book called Atonement. It is the first fiction book that I've read for a few years now because I had always had this misconception that I wasn't going to be able to learn anything from fiction. Previously, I'd been so focused on wanting to learn as much as I can from books that I was only giving non-fiction books a chance because everyone knows that non-fiction books are the more obvious choice when you're trying to learn things, because a lot of the information and knowledge and ideas are presented to you at face value without you having to do much analyzing and interpretation in order for you to get them. But a lot of my other YouTube ideas and a lot of the other things I like to do, they're influenced by other YouTubers. And John Fish actually made a video about how he thought reading fiction was, because fiction is really just a reflection of real human experiences and real human beliefs and ideas that the author has experienced or encountered by themselves, and is then paraphrasing it into a story that we as the readers have to unpackage in order to be able to obtain the sort of key ideas or motivations or messages within this book that are why the author wanted to write the book in the first place. Having seen that video, I just thought it would be a good chance for me to give fiction another chance. This book is Atonement, and the author is Ian McEwan. I hope that's how it's pronounced. An interesting fact about my experience of this book, I didn't actually know the meaning of the word atonement until I finished the book and decided to look it up. This was a silly decision of mine because I didn't actually know what was going on in this book until at least a third of the way in. If I were to have looked up what this word meant before I even started this book, I would have got an earlier idea of what was happening before I actually did when I was reading this book. Lesson learned: look up what the title of the book means before you start reading it. In fact, I might as well cut the actual definition of atonement right now so I don't get it wrong. Atonement is a noun, which means the actions of making amends for a wrong or injury. Just knowing what this word means, we can already get quite a good idea of what sort of story we're talking about. This book is a three-part book that is set in the first part to be in the pre-World War II era, where there's this wealthy family known as the Tallies, and they live somewhere in the countryside with a very nice mansion in England. And we have a few siblings of this within this family. The main character being Brioni, which is just a 11/12-year-old teenager, her older sister Cecilia, and an even older brother called Leon. This book takes place in the summer where all the siblings are coming back from university or coming back from work, and Leon brings back a friend called Paul Marshall, and some of their cousins are around the house, and the mother is at home as well. The father's still working in London. Essentially, this book is about one of their childhood friends called Robbie Turner, childhood friend of Cecilia, who is also the son of the maid for the house, Betty Turner, being accused of having raped one of their cousins, Lola, and ends up being sent to prison because Brioni, the youngest sibling of the Tallis family, actually told everyone in the police that she was 100% sure that it was him and accused him of committing rape onto her cousin. And there were a few moments leading up to this. For example, Brioni seeing Robbie having an intimate physical moment with her sister Cecilia and assuming the worst of it. And then the second part of this book is Robbie Turner having completed his sentence in prison for 2 or 3 years, and then later joining the British Army to go fight in Western Europe. And Cecilia, because felt betrayed by her younger sister Brioni for accusing her lover of raping another child, and being angry at the rest of the family for not doubting what her younger sister was claiming, decided to leave the family and actually work as a nurse in London and, leave behind all the good life that she used to have back at the mansion. Rest of this part 2 describes Robbie's experience in Europe as they were running back to Dunkirk, and his constant reminder to himself that his only reason to survive is because he needs to go back and see Cecilia, because they had only met once since he had left prison and before he was conscripted into the British Army. And they had constantly throughout the years been exchanging letters, expressing their love to each other, giving each other hope that they can eventually build a future together. And then the third part comes where Brioni is brought back into the timeline, and it's probably another few years later when Brioni had also left the comforts of home in order to work in the same hospital that her sister used to work in, because she wanted to find a way to meet with her sister again in order to make amends, hence atonement, for her mistake in the past. And she had to do so so because Cecilia had previously just rejected all the letters from the rest of the family and refused to be in contact with any of them. Brioni eventually finds her sister's whereabouts and then goes to give the surprise visit at her residence and finds that Robbie had actually returned from war and was spending time with Cecilia. Then came a very important conversation where Cecilia and Robbie are talking about how they will never forgive Brioni and that Brioni still had to try to do whatever she could to make amends for her mistake. And it was also during this conversation that they realized that the person who actually raped Lola, the cousin, was Paul Marshall, which is Leon's friend that came back with Leon to the mansion that summer. Ironically, those two actually ended up being married together. And because they're such a wealthy family with a lot of power, the three that were in the room discussing this problem realized that it might be very difficult for them to set things right in court. Brioni couldn't really just go into court and just say everything I said 10 years ago was wrong. It just wasn't very feasible. Then after the three parts of this book comes a very short journal entry that was written by Brioni herself in 1999. So this is way past all the events that happened around the World War II period. And as Brioni was writing this last journal in her 70s, the last 2 pages of her journal talk about how she was never able to really clear the name of Robbie because the Marshalls are too powerful and are able to suppress any news outlet that she was trying to get publish sort of the truth. Sort of the biggest plot twister in this book was in the last few lines when she talks about how part 3, when I just spoke about how she actually got to meet Cecilia and Robbie together, who were reunited after he had returned from war, that how all of those scenes were actually sort of fake, and she wrote that and that it turns out that she was the author for the second and third part of this book herself, and in reality Cecilia and Robbie were actually never able to reunite because Cecilia died from a bombing and Robbie was unable to survive and make it home when he was in Europe. So what really happened was Brioni actually ended up just making up the story of those two reuniting together because she thought she couldn't get herself to give the readers such a tragic ending to a tragic story where, we're so used to having these fairy tale moments where they always live happily ever after, and how that didn't take place in this book. And this is where I ended the book. What I just gave was more of a narration of a summary of the book rather than my own interpretations of what happened and why I think the book had to be written this way. Afterwards, when I read the reviews, I had a lot more thoughts coming into my head about why this book was structured this way and people's own interpretation of the characters' actions and their own judgment of whether or not Brioni was able to make up for her misaccusations from the past. I actually thought the story was real, and that's what I said to my girlfriend Nicole, who was sitting next to me when I finished this book. I said, "Oh, this book might be real. It's just doesn't sound very feasible that this story could be real if it's written by Brioni and Ian McEwan at the same time." But I guess this just sort of shows how gripping fiction can be sometimes. I didn't expect myself to be able to be so immersed into the story to actually think it was real. But regarding the actual reflections, I think having read some of the reviews online, most of the other readers were either critiquing or sympathizing with Brioni. Those that were critiquing her were saying that, "Oh, she's such a silly little girl. How could she be so sure of Robbie raping Lola, despite the fact that she didn't actually have evidence that it was Robbie? It was just sort of her own anger at Robbie that made her accuse them, ruined the rest of his life because he had to go to prison and then was conscripted to army, and it also ruined her sister's life." On the other hand, those that were sympathizing more with Brioni, talking about things like, "Oh, she's only 13, and also given the series of events, if you were to read through the details of what happened that night, it's not actually too surprising that Brioni accused Robbie of committing rape, because a few incidents that took place before all of this happened that night had actually misled Brioni to think that he had such bad intentions as to rape someone." And I think what's the most interesting part of this book, again, goes back to the end of the book where Brioni reviews that she actually falsified the event about her fake meeting with Cecilia and Robbie and having witnessed them reunite together after everything that had taken place. Some of the readers online were just talking about how plot twist sort of shows how far Brioni took to try to make amends for her older sister and Robbie. By then she was already 77. She had lived most of her life full of guilt. The fact that she wanted to lie to the readers by telling them that they had reunited to give them ideological justice, if that's the right way to put it, in the sense that they deserved to be together. So even if they couldn't be together in reality, that at least in story form, they could theoretically live happy ever after. And this is also sort of expressed in the book itself, where there was a very important line towards the end where she says, "I like to think it isn't weakness or evasion, but a final act of kindness, a stand against oblivion, despair, to let my lovers live and to unite them at the end. Then I guess the final question we have to ask ourselves is whether this atonement was actually justified or not. Was Brioni able to make amends for her mistakes? There are probably plenty of perspectives to take on this. Not too sure myself. But I guess despite having given such a poor summary of what this book is about, I think this experience has really told me the power of reading fiction. It's not always about having to read certain facts or being able to learn to code or being able to learn to type, but just being able to immerse yourself in these stories can actually help us to reflect a lot, which I think is probably important for the human experience, because we often don't reflect enough on actions, and sometimes it can be easy for us, especially myself, to see things too materialistically, if that's even the word. I had a very positive experience with this book, and I hope to be able to continue having such good experiences with future fiction. Okay, so that's the end of the video. Thank you for watching to the end. I understand that these are not really book reviews because I'm learning to get the ropes of what it's like to actually read through fiction, what's it like to take notes, and what it's like to present a book summary to another person. Please bear with me as I continue, hopefully to do a few more of these to see progression and be able to be a better reader and be a better book reviewer as well in the future. Thank you for watching this video, and see you next time.